Wow, I mean, the news about Siya and Rachel Kolisi splitting up, it really did seem to catch everyone off guard.
Yeah, it definitely it got people talking, for sure.
I guess it's not surprising, though. I mean, when you think about it, Siya being the first black captain of the Springboks, South Africa's national rugby team, that's a pretty big deal, right?
Right.
Especially for a country that's, still dealing with its past.
Absolutely. And they kind of became this symbol of something more,
Hmm.
like hope, unity, moving past all that division.
So in this deep dive, what we want to do is kind of look deeper into all that, like what's the social and cultural stuff around their story? And to help us do that, we've got some interesting points from a YouTube video by Zach Wakasa.
Yeah, you've really hit on something important there,
Yeah.
the idea that this couple represented something much bigger than just, themselves.
Right, right. Okay, so let's back up a sec. What was it about Siya Kolisi that made him such a, I don't know, such a huge figure, especially for Black South Africans? I mean, he wasn't just any captain, was he?
No, not at all. You have to remember, rugby in South Africa, it's like deeply connected to apartheid and a time when it was basically seen as a white sport. So for Siya to be captain, well, it really challenged that whole narrative. Imagine the impact for Black South Africans, seeing one of their own, leading this team that had always been white, and not just leading them, but winning on a global stage too.
It's interesting because Moikasa talks about this in his video. He says there's this feeling of pride, even when someone from your country is playing for a different team.
Right, and that gets to the core of why Siya's captaincy meant so much to people. It went beyond just, regular team rivalry, because it was about something bigger, a shared identity, this sense of national pride that Black South Africans hadn't really been a part of for so long. Think about it. Have you ever felt that rush of excitement when someone from your hometown or your country does something amazing, even if it's not something you usually follow?
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's that whole we did it feeling,
Right.
right? Even though we didn't actually do anything.
Exactly. And I think that's what a lot of Black South Africans felt with Siya. It was like finally they were being seen. They had a stake in this national symbol that had always felt out of reach.
And then you have this interracial couple, right? The Kalisis, right there in the spotlight. Almost like this symbol of hope for a unified South Africa.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that their marriage happened in a society that's still dealing with the effects of apartheid,
Yeah.
these deep racial divisions. So their relationship was very public, and it became tied to this idea of moving past those divisions. It represented the kind of future that many people were hoping for.
So they were like this aspiration, this image of what South Africa could be. But then things took a turn, didn't they? Siya moving to France to play for Racing 92. It kind of messed with that whole story. Michael Casa really emphasizes how this goes against what he calls traditional Black South African culture.
Yeah, that's worth digging into a bit more. What he's saying is that in Black South African communities, there's this big emphasis on staying close to home, building your life within the community, finding opportunities in your own country.
But hold on a sec. Isn't going after opportunities abroad also a way of being empowered? Especially for someone from a background that's faced so much disadvantage. Like, maybe Soraya was trying to create a better future for his family.
That's a good point, and it raises some questions about how those traditional values fit in with, the reality of a globalized world, especially in professional sports. Soraya going to France, it was a huge career move, no doubt, but it came with a cost. He even said himself that he wasn't comfortable being away from his family in the Springboks. So there's this conflict there, right, between personal ambition and those deep cultural values, and I think that's what makes this story so interesting.
And of course, we can't ignore the big question mark hanging over everything. The speculation about why they split up, especially the rumors of infidelity. Now, Waikasa mentions this, but he doesn't get caught up in all the gossip. Instead, he brings up something pretty thought-provoking, this stereotype about men, particularly Black men, changing once they become successful.
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive topic, but one that's worth thinking about. He's not saying it's okay or making excuses for anyone, but he's asking us to consider the pressure and temptations that come with wealth and fame, how those things might affect relationships and the choices people make. It adds another layer to understanding Siya's story.
It's like we're seeing the human side of someone who had been put on this pedestal, almost like a myth.
Exactly. And Awakasa also suggests that maybe cultural differences in how relationships work could be a factor too. He says that Black men and women might have different ways of approaching relationships with partners from different racial backgrounds.
That's something to consider, for sure. We've been talking about these big cultural forces, but at the end of the day, this is a personal story, a relationship between two people.
And that's where things get even more interesting. because despite all the rumors and potential drama, there's something really remarkable about how Siya and Rachel handled announcing their separation. They really focus on that mutual respect and co-parenting their kids
Mm.
and continuing to work together in their foundation.
It's almost like they're trying to show a different way to separate, no public fighting or anything. And they're still committed to the things they started together. Wakasa talks about their emotional intelligence. It's definitely not what we usually see when famous couples break up, would you say?
No, definitely not. It shows a level of maturity and self-awareness that's often missing in those situations.
Yeah.
It would have been easy to start blaming each other, but they chose a different path.
It's interesting because we were talking about how the Kolisis were seen as this symbol of unity and hope. But now that they're separated, it makes you wonder, does this mean those hopes for a more unified South Africa were misplaced?
That's a big question. And it's something that Wakasa really digs into in his video. He challenges us to think about whether we put too much weight on individual relationships as a sign of progress for society as a whole.
So are we saying that relationships between people from different races can't help bring about positive social change?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
But as Wakasa points out, it's important to remember that while these relationships can challenge individual prejudices and be inspiring examples, they can't by themselves dismantle the deep-rooted systems of inequality that exist.
It's like that saying, one swallow doesn't make a summer. Right? You need more than just a few examples to create real lasting change.
That's a perfect analogy. It's like expecting a single tree to fix an entire forest that's been damaged by fire. You need a much bigger, more comprehensive approach to really restore things.
So how do we move beyond those symbolic gestures and actually tackle those systemic problems?
Well, Miyakasa doesn't have all the answers, but he does encourage us to look beyond individual actions and consider the bigger picture. In South Africa, for example, addressing things like economic disparities that contribute to racial tensions, making sure there's diversity in all areas of life, dismantling the structures that keep inequality going. Those are all crucial pieces of the puzzle.
It's like we can't just focus on celebrating the exceptions. We have to adjust the rule. So zooming out a bit, what does the Kolisi story, seen through the lens that Mwekasa provides, tell us about the state of racial reconciliation in South Africa or even in the world as a whole?
It reminds us that progress is rarely a straight line. There will be setbacks, disappointments, times when we wonder if true reconciliation is even possible.
And Mwekasa doesn't shy away from some of the less appealing aspects of the story either, like the rumors about infidelity and those stereotypes about wealth and black men. It's not exactly comfortable to talk about, but it feels important that he brings it up.
I agree. It would be easy to just get caught up in that idealized version of the Kolisi, the fairy tale romance that crossed racial boundaries. But real life, as we all know, is messy. And human behavior, no matter someone's race or social status, is complicated and often far from perfect.
It's like if we avoid those tough conversations, we end up oversimplifying a very complex issue.
Exactly. This isn't about blaming anyone or judging them. It's about acknowledging that even in a relationship that seemed to represent hope and progress, there were still those underlying tensions and complications.
So what can we learn from this? What are the key takeaways for us, the listeners, as we navigate issues of race and relationships in our own lives?
I think one of the most important lessons here is the importance of emotional maturity.
Like Siya going to therapy, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful example. But it goes beyond just seeking professional help. It's about being honest with ourselves and our partners about what we need and expect,
Right.
recognizing when we need support and having the courage to ask for it.
And being aware of that cultural baggage we all carry, right? Those unspoken assumptions and biases that we might bring into our relationships.
Absolutely. We need to be willing to have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations about race and culture, to listen with empathy and understanding, and be open to challenging our own preconceived notions.
Maybe by being more open and honest about our own struggles, we can create space for more genuine connections, regardless of race or background.
Something Lukasa said in his video really stuck with me. He observed that black South Africans, unlike many other Africans, tend to stay in their country and not look for opportunities elsewhere. He suggests they feel like they have everything they need within South Africa.
That's really interesting. It suggests a real sense of self-sufficiency, right? Like a belief that they can find solutions and progress within their own nation.
Yeah, I think so. There's definitely a strong sense of pride in their country and a dedication to building a better future for themselves within South Africa.
But doesn't that also raise some questions like, could that inward focus maybe limit opportunities, or like keep them from seeing different perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. And it shows this interesting tension, right, between holding on to a strong national identity and being open to a more global view. I think a lot of countries struggle with that. But it's especially important for South Africa, given its history.
It's almost like that tension we talked about before, right? Celebrating individual stories of unity while also recognizing that we need bigger systemic changes.
Yeah, you got it. It's easy to get caught up in the feel-good stories. But real progress needs us to understand both the problems and the possibilities, in a more complex way.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been a whirlwind, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We started with Siya Kolisi's rise, the symbol of hope. Then we dug into the complications of his separation. And now, here we are, talking about these huge questions about race, relationships, and how society changes.
It's definitely been a journey, yeah. And throughout it all, Vekwakasa's analysis has been really helpful. He doesn't shy away from tough questions, and he makes us think critically about what's going on.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Kolisi story and what it all means, what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing, at least for me, is that progress isn't always a smooth path. There will be times of celebration, times of disappointment, times when we wonder if true reconciliation is even possible.
But through all of that, we have to keep trying, keep learning, keep having those tough conversations.
Exactly. And remember, we each have a part to play in creating a more just and fair future, whether it's looking at our own biases, getting help when we need it, or fighting for systemic change. We all have the power to make a difference.
That's a pretty hopeful note to end on, right? The Kolisi separation might have broken that image of a perfect symbol, but it started a really important conversation that can help us understand race, relationships, and the journey toward reconciliation in a more honest and meaningful way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And with that, we'll leave you with one last thought. Have you ever seen firsthand the pressures and complexities of relationships that cross cultural lines? What have you learned from your own experiences? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive on the